I'll be returning to Washington today. And this week, we in Congress will be taking up the Defense Authorization Bill. This is the comprehensive legislation that authorizes budgeting expenditures for the entire Defense Department. Usually exceeds well over $700 billion. It's not the appropriation bill itself, that'll come later, but it's the authorization bill. It contains everything from issues affecting bases, military pay, funding for the wars, and it is comprehensive. It also has language in there about the use of force that exceeds what currently is in law. So, by way of introduction, this is an extraordinarily comprehensive authorization bill. This is going to be the first opportunity that Congress has to reevaluate the nation-building strategy that America has been pursuing for 10 years in Afghanistan. And the time is now to re-examine that policy. Nation-building is expensive. It's $2.5 billion or so a week, and it's not sustainable. And many are questioning whether it is effective. I will be offering an amendment with Congressman Jason Chaffetz, a Republican of Utah, calling upon the Secretary of Defense to reevaluate the policy of nation building and to present to Congress within 60 days of the passage of this amendment, should it pass, a plan that would move away from nation building and towards counter-terrorism, with the intention of bringing our troops in Afghanistan home. We now have 100,000 troops in Afghanistan. They're supplemented by about 100,000 contractors. The cost is about $2 billion to $2.5 billion a year. Our ally in Afghanistan is a corrupt Karzai government. The corruption in Afghanistan is getting worse, not better. And the question here is whether a nation-building strategy that depends on a corrupt ally and has taxpayers and our military engaged in nation-building is A, sustainable, and B, the most effective way to secure our national security. Congressman Chaffetz and I and many others in Congress are asking the question, isn't it time to change towards counterterrorism? The success in killing Osama bin Laden has caused many of my colleagues to take a step back and re-examine a policy that is long overdue. What we saw with the killing of Osama bin Laden is that the other approach of counterterrorism, based on comprehensive and coordinated intelligence and the use of special forces to target an identified target, has been effective. And where you have a continuing threat to the United States from terrorism, but the nature of that threat is not centered in a nation. General Petraeus tells us that there's probably 50 or so al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. But it's a decentralized and dispersed threat. We need a decentralized and dispersed response. And that is not 100,000 troops and 100,000 contractors in one country, when the threat of terrorism in many parts of the world requires a dispersed and decentralized response. So those of us who are asking the question about the wisdom of continuing an expensive and we believe unsustainable nation-building approach are calling upon the Secretary of Defense in this amendment to provide Congress within 60 days with a plan that would protect America but move us away from the nation-building strategy. And the goal would be to bring our troops in Afghanistan home, those who are dedicated to the nation-building task. We have a few other amendments as well that would supplement this. Another is to refocus America's policy on Afghanistan. That amendment would take away funding that was engaged in nation-building and limit the funding to counterterrorism. The first amendment that I mentioned is a bipartisan amendment with Congressman Chaffetz and me is focused on the policy, calling on that Secretary of Defense to give us a new policy. A third amendment is going after inclusion in this Defense Authorization Bill of extremely comprehensive language that broadens the authority of the Commander-in-Chief to use military force in any part of the world. Under the current authorization, the President has authority to go after Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. The new language would allow...
Paging John Epistola Jr., John Epistola Jr.
The new language
Please
would allow
come to
the
the front
President
ticket counter. John Epistola
agent
Jr., please come to the front
any
ticket
terrorist
counter.
organization. It is extremely broad. It amounts in effect to a blank check. Our view is that if the President is going to pursue force and is going to commit American troops to combat, that is a central question that requires the yes or no, the vote of Congress up or down. The Fourth Amendment would prevent mission creep in Libya. The President right now is bumping up against the War Powers Act and the necessity to come to Congress for permission to continue. My view is that the President should seek permission under the War Powers Act, but this amendment would limit the potential for mission creep in Libya by prohibiting the introduction of American troops on the ground. And the last amendment I'm going to speak about today is about cracking down on contractor corruption. I sponsored legislation that passed the House of Representatives in the last Congress that would prohibit companies that were found to be in violation of federal law from being able to get contracts from the taxpayer. These contracts are incredibly lucrative. Oftentimes, a person under a contract will be working side by side with one of our private first class. Private first class might be making $30,000 for their service. The contractor may be making $200,000 or $300,000. And some of these contractors have been found to be in direct violation of American law. If they are in violation of American law, our amendment that was passed last year, and we're introducing again, would debar, prohibit those companies that are in violation of the law from taking taxpayer dollars. So this is going to be a very busy week on the Defense Authorization Bill. It's the first moment we've had a chance in Congress to re-examine the Afghanistan nation-building policy since the killing of Osama bin Laden. Thank you.